Welcome, brave souls, to another haunting chapter of Ghost Girl Diaries, where the supernatural awaits, transmitting from the other side, where paranormal meets glamour. I'm your host this evening, Crystal Leandra, the Queen of the Dead, a paranormal filmmaker and investigator, and the glam behind the ghost hunt. Here we dive into spine-chilling hauntings, explore the unknown, and uncover the secrets across the most haunted locations in the world. Whether you're a believer or a skeptic, you're in for a thrill. So grab your EMF meter, your crystals, and your cross, because things are about to get supernatural with a little bit of glam. Let's get haunted. This is Ghost Girl Diaries. I'm about to talk some shit on today's podcast, okay? So I have a lot to say. This could be a really good podcast. I really went on a deep dive, okay? My Aquarius moon got out of control, okay? Sometimes when it gets out of control, she just orbits. She has orbited, okay? This is going to be really good, but I'm dead serious when I say I need your thinking caps on today. If you do not have the capacity for critical thinking today, skip it for now and come back, okay? Because this is going to blow your effing mind, all right? Welcome, my haunted loves, to the house of Ghost Girl Diaries. This is a place where beauty gets a little ghostly, history gets a little hierarchical, and let me just say about today, the divine feminine refuses to be buried. I don't know if you guys knew this about me. I know I love astrology. You know, I geek out on that. I want more podcasts, and I love how receptive you guys have been to it. I've gotten comments and like messages from you. I love that you're absorbing the astrology because I really feel like it's a cheat code to your life, okay? Going back to my chart for a minute though, the lights just flickered in here, which is probably my spirit team's like, hey, are we late to the podcast? I have a couple of what you call witch wounds in my chart, okay? As if I didn't already look like I'm summoning the dead, which I am, in fact. I have my moon in the 8th house, and I have Mars and Chiron in the 12th house. So the 8th and 12th house are the spiritual houses, essentially. It's deeper than that, but let's just keep it basic today. And having your moon, which is your internal thought process, in the 8th house of occult mysticism, and then my Mars and Chiron. So Chiron is your wound. Mars is basically like how you argue, how you communicate, how you fight, sex. That's in my 12th house. I was probably burned at the stake or hung for being a witch multiple times in a past life. So I'll be damned if I let that happen again, which is why I'm using that to enter into this podcast. I also just want to reiterate that this podcast in particular is going to be the start of a series that I'm wanting this to be the start of empowering not only women in my circle, but men in my circle, okay? I want this to feel empowering, sort of understanding in occultism, especially, where our power was revoked, okay? I'm getting the chills, so I can tell my spirit team's here. Tonight, we're going to lift the veil on a deep, dark secret, maybe one of the greatest cover-ups in human history, in my opinion, okay? You may already know the facts behind this history. There's a lot more to add. I could have gone on for days, okay? This is essentially going to be a podcast on the war on women, the war on witches, a war on occult, the war on paranormal. I have a ton of notes, girl. Okay, so just sit down, get comfortable. Look at this adorable ghost mug. I found this at Target for $5. So cute. I had another one I got there years ago, and she was on her last leg. One random fact about me is I am obsessed with mugs. I have a mug problem. Like, you know how when people travel, they buy like keychains? When I travel, I buy mugs. And like, I have so many mugs. I had to get rid of so many in prep for like moving. So anyway, out of the ghost mug, okay, get some coffee, get some tea, get cozy, put me on the big TV on YouTube. I love when you guys say you do that. That just makes me so happy because that's really the vibe that I want, right? We're going to sit in we're going to be in a circle. We're in a divine circle. We're summoning a safe circle here tonight, okay? This is for my witches, my warlocks, my occultists, my spooky boos, my spooky babes, okay? We're going to talk about a deep subject today. It's sort of erasing of the divine feminine and the rebranding of occult as evil, okay? Because of certain powers sort of wanted to gatekeep God. You know, do you pick up what I'm putting down? You know where I'm going with this. Okay. This is going to be kind of a controversial topic, but it's funny because like very rarely I get super religious people on my channel, very rarely. And I don't worry about that because like, why would a super religious person be listening to a paranormal occult podcast and or watching goth makeup fashion tutorials? So if you are, boo, there's a chance you could be in the closet occultist, which please join, come in. But I mean, like when people try to use their like tongue lashing against me due to religious trauma, you know, the whole typical you're going to go to hell because you ghost hunt type of thing. I don't even believe that. So like, I'm not going to buy into your beliefs. I was raised on extremely spiritual indigenous beliefs because my family's indigenous, right? Cherokee. My grandmother lived on the res, and those beliefs are what I hold in my heart. And so if you tell me occult's evil, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Okay, I want to talk about where this came from. Okay. You know, they tell you to fear your dreams, fear your intuition. Don't trust that little voice in your head when you know something's wrong. Don't take herbs, take medicine, right? Which I believe in Eastern and Western medicine. That's another podcast. Don't believe in your tarot. The tarot is the devil, right? Your inner knowing, that's not true. You need to get on medication because you could be crazy. They blocked us as a society from speaking to the divine because it needs to be gatekept through religion, right? And they told you if you don't obey, essentially you're demonic and you have something wrong with you. That's what they said back in the day with witches. But I'm here to remind you that the occult was never evil, okay? My witch wound of my witchiness being burned at the stake several times, probably. Jesus, you know, here we go. At this point, it feels like home. The fire is warm. It was sacred. And the real devil was the system that made you forget. So let's just tuck that in the back of your mind, right? Grab your candle, your tea, summon out your inner witch. Sit with me in the circle right now because we're about to resurrect the motherfucking truth. Okay, motherfucking King James. Okay. Do we know who King James the Fourth was, really? Okay. Or was he the sixth? I think it's King James the Sixth. I'm sorry. I'm not good at reading numeric numbers. Okay. He was from Scotland and he became King James of England in 1603. Okay. He was claimed in the 1600s for uniting crowns, sort of uniting different clans and countries of people. But let's just not forget, first of all, he was deeply obsessed with the supernatural in a bad way. And I want to tell you, I know you're thinking, Crystal, what the hell? Where are you going with this? I know. Here's where the podcast became a thing, okay? I have a lot of guy friends, I have a lot of male friends that are into occult, spiritualism, mystical, whatever, straight men, okay? And I had some conversations with them and they were like, where did this patriarchy bullshit come from? Like, really, where did it come from? Like, we know it's all witch wounds and it comes back from like the, you know, the Salem witch trials and like the country, you know, coming in and like taking over indigenous land. Like, okay, we get the colonization thing, but like, there's gotta be something before that. That's where my idea went with this, okay? And I went on a rabbit hole that I was not prepared for. This guy, King James, let's just start blaming him for everything, okay? Like legit, straight up, in the occult, King James needs to be blamed for everything. He was obsessed with the supernatural. I'm talking demons, witches, prophecy, omens, psychics, obsessed, okay? And in my thought process, even if this was the 1600s, if someone's that into it, it's probably because they believe, right? But at the time, they couldn't see that. He was kind of a self-claimed prophet. And he basically thought that because he could talk to God or whatever hierarchy, that all of this, demons, witches, prophecy, psychics, omens, it's the demons. Those are all demons. It's demonic. And how do we get rid of it as a society? And the crazy part is his obsession with the occult literally shaped politics. It shaped his writings. He did a lot of writing. And he sort of shaped the future of the English-speaking world because of this, okay? Now, have you ever heard of the King James Bible? Right, 1611, same guy. Guess what he wrote in 1597? A book called Demonology. Okay, so the demonology book came before the Bible. Now, not everyone still follows the King James Bible. It's been translated God knows how many times since then. But why would a man who's so godly write a Bible after he wrote a demonology book? This man single-handedly wrote the most famous Bible mixed with a actual witch hunting manual, okay? I want that duality to sink in your brain. The man that Christianity is essentially formed by, that wrote this book in 1611, or translated the Bible, his version of his translation, also wrote a witch hunting book. He caused all of this. It was like a trickle. It was like this. See where my Aquarius moon brain, this is my internal world. When I start figuring stuff out like this, blows my mind. Okay. So let's talk about demonology for a second. It is essentially a philosophical dialogue that he wrote on witchcraft itself. Okay. He talks about necromancy. He talks about possession, werewolves. He has an obsession with werewolves, by the way, and demons. I also have an obsession with a specific werewolf, but we're not going to talk about that. Written in 3 books, essentially, was this demonology book. Okay. It basically calls for European witch hunts and godly justice to be done against witches. Is your mind blown yet? Here's the, what's the word I'm looking for? To play God. It's just like hypocrisy. On one hand, you're saying like, do good of godly stuff, but like on the other hand, injustices against women and humans in general, is that also godly? At what point were you determined as God to determine if these people were actual witches or needed to be killed or what? You know what I'm saying? Like, he was playing God and he was teaching others to play God. And it has literally trickled down hundreds of years later. If you're not annoyed by that in any capacity, Jesus, wait till I have more to say. We're not even halfway done, okay? He based the fear around folklore and sort of religious righteousness, okay? And in the 1600s, it was just a pilgrimaged age where when that information's shared, you believe it, period, right? Like, witches are servants of the devil, right? So they must be destroyed. The reality is it will create a demonic pact, so we must rid them of our villages. And so that's how we come up with justification for torture and execution of these accused witches, which is also the witch wound, where people would just start tattling on each other. She's a witch, he's a witch. It was mainly women, of course. It was a legitimacy of prophecy and divination, air quote, but only through the God-approved channels. So only if the godly approved channel says, you are thy witch, you must be. I mean, literally think of like Zachary Binks and like that, in the beginning of Hocus Pocus, like they're dressed like in the pilgrimage days, like just accusing each other of witchcraft. Like it must have been a frenzy. It must have been a frenzy. This book essentially was a how-to guide for witch trials. It was cloaked in this like theatrical BS, in my opinion, and political language to make it more believable. And once again, fear, to create fear that instilled in society due to religious trauma and cult ideologies. And I guess the question is, what was his goal? Was to stamp out the superstition, get rid of the superstition of witches. If we rid the world of evil, then we will be living in peace in the God Holy Land, right? But ironically, by institutionalizing it, he did it under the banner or ideology of Christianity and Orthodox. Is your brain not exploding yet? So let's talk about, did he have influence in the witch trials? You bet he did. His obsession with witchcraft and witches preceded Salem. So we're not talking about Salem here. We're talking before pre-Salem, right? Like, witch trials had been going on, like 100 years pre-Salem in like Europe. He laid out serious groundwork to shake society of occultism and to disconnect humans from source, quite literally unplug. In Scotland, his writings alone fueled multiple witch hunts, including the North Berwick witch trials, which was in 1590. Apparently it was really traumatic. And James personally investigated that one himself, okay? His ideas filtered through Puritan theology, and unfortunately, this is what carried colonizers to the United States. Are you understanding what I'm saying with your thinking caps? He had created a belief system so deep in the people that came to the United States, and that was then embedded into the United States ideology. So this goes way back, and it doesn't just end, right? This also lays back over into American colonial witch trials. So we're talking Salem. But it wasn't just Salem, it was everywhere. So now the question is, does this also somehow relate to the Constitution of the United States? is the patriarchy been so confined since then that it was blinded, and it was basically in our upbringing of our basic laws and regulations? Many early colonists were deeply religious, especially like the Puritans that came here. They were already balls deep in King James Bible. Like, it was too late. They were already in total fear of the occult. And honestly, that got me thinking. Because I'm indigenous, right? I'm Cherokee. My family survived the Trail of Tears, which is quite rare. My family is on something called the Dallas Rolls, it's a very depressing, it's not a thing to brag about, for God's sake, but I'm also grateful we're on it, because it basically means my family survived the Trail of Tears, which is just horrible. But Cherokee, not just Cherokee, all indigenous are extremely spiritual, right? We believe God is in everything. God is in you. God is in me. We are God, right? Your higher self is, God is in this damn light right here. God is in this cup. Like, when you eat something, you give thanks to it because it's sent from spirit. It's very spiritual. So if these colonists came here and experienced indigenous people and their spiritualism, they probably thought they were the devil. Now, what happens to our legal and cultural foundations that were influenced by King James? Really, it makes it nervous. It does me. I mean, the Constitution was later built between the church and the state. So while the King James Bible wasn't necessarily written into law as forced to be followed, it was often used in law, cited in courtrooms, as we know still to this day. May not be that exact Bible, but that's where it started. Used in oaths. Think about that. What does it mean today? We're still living in the fucking echoes of this man, okay? I don't know if there's a hell, but if there is a hell, how this one person had so much control over societies hundreds of years later, I hope he's there. Does he understand the ramifications that he has caused trickle down for hundreds of years? It's crazy, bro. Think about satanic panic in the 1980s. That's all. I mean, that wasn't that long ago. It's 20, 30 years ago, whatever, 40 years ago. That's not that long ago. What do you think satanic panic was from? What do you think satanic panic was from? And I'm not saying that there aren't Satanists out there. There's people that do dark shit. There's always going to be light and dark, always, right? But to have a panic over it, I really think that's why Ed and Lorraine Warren at their time did so well. I think Ed was a opportunist hardcore. I think he was a businessman at the end of the day. I think Lorraine was legit, but I think you put him together, he was sort of feeding off of her gifts, and they were also feeding off of fear within society, which is why when people talk about Ed and Lorraine are the greatest, it makes me cringe so bad, because I think that they monopolized. I'm not saying all of their cases were fake, but I'm just saying I think they were overly exaggerated to an extent. And I think it was the perfect time because, once again, you still have religious trauma, religious fear happening. You have this burly man saying, I'm going to come in and get that demon. Sounds like somebody else, doesn't it? Come up out of that hole and get me. And suddenly we feel safe now that Ed is here to protect us. Make me throw up all over myself. Still to this day, just so you know, still to this day, the King James Bible is still one of the most printed, sold Bibles as a whole. Still to this day. It's also most quoted, most weaponized against in texts in America. Why hasn't demonology gotten that kind of, you know what I'm saying? If he wrote the demonology book, why hasn't it gotten that kind of publicity? It makes you kind of wonder. But that's probably because it's already done what it needed to do, which was create religious fear, justify control. And especially it was specifically over women, healers, mystics, anyone that was other. In this day and age, if you were goth or alternative or into occult or paranormal, you would have been hung at the stake too. So let's break this down really quick. We have a royal obsession with this man. He's the strange mind of King James. He is both Bible translator, he is the prophet of God and Bible translator, and he's also a witch hunter. Okay, cool. Book of Shadows, break it down. Got demonology. What? God told him to write this, and to write this text manuscript. And, as if the religious trauma of silencing women wasn't enough, let's add others or occultists or spiritualists. Let's get rid of them. It makes you wonder if the Bible that he wrote or transcribed, whatever you want to call it, was it used as a moral weapon against each other? At the end of the day, we're all human, right? We are still using that moral compass against each other. That's the witch wound, right? The famous witch wound. A witch wound is when you call someone out for, a perfect example is, Michaela Noguera. I'm not a huge fan of her on TikTok. I follow her like a little bit, but she's a little too normie for me. But she did this like big scandal thing of like lashes, and like she added lashes to mascara. You know what I'm talking about. Okay, that's the core of it. That makes sense why people should be upset. It's false advertising. But then people think that it's socially acceptable to start calling her fat and ugly and make fun of the way she looks. That's the witch wound. We've all been trained that if someone's getting called out for one little thing, let's all jump on the bandwagon and take them down while they're weak. That's the witch hunts in 3D to this day. We're using gospel as government with this Bible. And it makes you wonder, did America just inherit this spiritual modern echoes? How is it even holding on to this day? Ambient horror is the question, is the fact that it's a horror that is still trailing us. As of right now, we're seeing it happen again. Did he really believe in supernatural? Like, that was my next question, my Aquarius moon. This is how my moon thinks, right? My inner thoughts, my inner dialogue. All right, if he is this hardcore about learning about spiritualism and wants to take out the women that are spiritualists and occultists specifically, what made him this way? He believed witches were real 100%. Okay, I did a deep dive. It said he believed that witches could cause storms. He did when was this? It was 1590, okay? He was on a boat, or his ship, and his ship nearly sank. They don't know the full story of this. There's theories behind it. But when his ship nearly wrecked, he completely believed it was demons that were possessing people or demons that were possessing witches, and that sorcerers, the witches were sorcerers, and they made pacts with the devil to take him down. So at some point he had a run-in with witches, which we'll get to that. There's more on that too. But he had firsthand interrogations of accused witches, and he actually endorsed torture of women, and he did it to extract confessions. So in my opinion, what happened is someone would be called a witch. This was European times. And they would torture this poor woman until she finally admitted it, hoping the torture would stop, and then they would unalive her. He also had this weird obsession with werewolves. Once again, so do I. He liked other shape-shifting entities, but he said it was all satanic influence. So he must have had some sort of experience, spiritual experience. It's too bad that he turned it into fear instead of empowerment, because this could have gone a totally different way. But this is because he lived in a time where Catholicism and being a Protestant was sort of waging spiritual warfares, right? And the devil was considered an active political agent, so they were able to piggyback off of that. He created the devil himself. James literally considered himself not just a king, not just a prophet, but he believed at his core that he was God's warrior on earth and that he had a message to share with earthbound people. He believed that it was his job to protect people from evil. So why did everyone believe him? Why did everyone listen to him? Slew of answers. Was black magic real? Well, of course it was, says King James. But this would create power, position, politics, and propaganda, all in which he profited off of. Man, his words became immortal. They are literally alive to this day. He claimed he was both king and God's representative. He also said it wasn't just about politics, that it was about theology. Remember, back then, kings ruled by divine right, meaning God chose him to rule. So if you're in a religious time where you believe the king has been chosen not by bloodline, but because God said so, everything else that he is told is of God, right? So when James wrote demonology, he wasn't just some guy writing about philosophical insight. He wasn't some dude that was scared of witches and spooky interests. He was seen as someone that was divinely guided, speaking from God himself. And here's the crazy part, like we're talking back in the 1600s, his views were not optional for people to believe. It was moral by law for many. All right, so fast forward to the Bible. So he writes this Bible, right? He wanted the version of this Bible to reinforce his authority, because remember, you have to be obedient to a king. He wanted to standardize the Church of England because he didn't want people to rebel, because if you rebelled, you were demonically possessed. You also had to be removed from society. Everyone must get in line. He reshaped the Bible for Christian-speaking world. So he basically took spiritual authority, which was a scripture that was already written, although translated now, infused it with his own worldview, gave this legacy as a direct line to the other kings and queens of England. This would be forced into every pupil, every classroom, every courtroom, every household for literal centuries. Now, don't forget that witch hunts were already like common. It was already happening, right? He didn't invent the witch trials per se, but he intellectualized them to make it smarter to be able to spot a witch and to be able to try a witch. Then that gave people this book, Demonology, the royal stamp of approval. And in my opinion, it's basically like local hysteria, right? Of just, who's the witch? Who do we find next to burn? But once a king says it's real, it is, for centuries. The courts say it's real. The clergy says it's real. The public follows suit. Still to this day in courtrooms, we still swear oath on a Bible. Thank you, mofo King James. The guy is a goddamn demonic legend, in my opinion. It wasn't just a panic. It wasn't satanic panic. It was doctrine, period. You know, he came out as this scholar, this intellectual, religious scholar. He wasn't just shouting, burn the witch. He was saying, I have philosophical dialogue and, downloads from source, from God, for credibility. And this is, it sounds intellectual, like, he was his own demonologist, essentially. It made him appear to be legitimate in this field of study, but no one questioned where his study came from, where his words came from, where his beliefs in demons and witches came from, because you don't question a king. And also remember, fear in the masses. Fear is a powerful tool. We're seeing it right now, right? The masses were terrified of things like disease, bad weather, death, being poor, war, right? So they always look to the king, the ruler, the person running the country to make sure we're safe. And if that person is saying that there's supernatural and, people trying to hurt us that are witches, like, it's going to make people lose a sense of control. But he has an answer, which is pray to God and you'll be safe. Turn all the witches in and you'll be safe. So if the king says a witch started the plague, or, demons are the ones that made your neighbors convulse, even though medical advancement at the time was terrible, doesn't matter. It was still a demon. People would cling onto that explanation. And his Bible was a way for them to protect themselves because they were obedient to him. They were obedient to the church. They were obedient to the crown. Imagine the people that they unalived that just had serious health complications because health advancement, medical advancement wasn't a thing back then. It's pretty sad, isn't it? So, really, did his word become God? Probably not exactly, but close enough, right? Close enough to at least it's still clung on to this day and age. He's the reason thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. And that echoes still to this day and age, centuries later. Honestly, if you think about it in this way, right? King James was the ultimate influencer of his time. But it wasn't TikTok and YouTube, what you're seeing right now. It was a royal printing press and a literal church, government, courts, and public fear was his actual algorithm. And the crazy part about this guy is he didn't go viral. He went biblical. So why does this still matter sort of in this day and age? Once again, my Aquarius moon taps back in. It kind of shapes modern Christian thinking. Think about it. Newer translations do exist, but we still go based off of his Bible. The demonization of women is still happening right now. Witches, healers, mediums, and spiritual practitioners. It all goes back to demonology. If you're into paranormal and occult, it was not mainstream until 10, 15 years ago? Ed and Lorraine Warren, yeah, they were in the news, but for what? The same thing. Fear-mongering through religion. Which is why I'm not a supporter of theirs, right? That's not modern. That's not contemporary. We've just barely broke the surface with stage 1 of coming out of this occult trauma that was created by this man hundreds of years ago. We're still unlearning the idea that spiritual means dangerous, especially when it comes to a feminine intuition, and that's considered ungodly. Because Eve came from the rib of Adam after all. It doesn't matter that she has a womb and that's where all people come from, but we won't talk about that. So as I was doing this deep dive, I came across this thing that talked about King James' mother was accused of witchcraft herself. Mary, Queen of Scots, which is his mother, okay? She was a devout Catholic. I'm reading my notes because I'm still shook over this part, okay? She was already at odds with the Protestant, Scotland is what it said. She was imprisoned and eventually executed by her cousin, Queen Elizabeth, I think I, not for witchcraft, but for treason, but she was considered a witch. During her lifetime, many of her political enemies associated with her with sorcery, divination, and superstition. So I'm wondering if she did tarot or... So I wonder if he had a mother wound. Can you hear me if you're a healer out there? And if you've... excuse me, I'm coughing to get it out. Sounds to me like this mofo had a deep mother wound because his mom was essentially exiled from society, okay? And he had to go the opposite direction to make it look like, because he didn't want to lose his throne. He didn't want to lose the throne. So he had to go the extremist route the other way to secure his place, which is just crazy. It was a mother wound, bro. I'm going to die on that mountain. I'm going to die on that hill. He had a mother wound. Tells you how effed up trauma is on earth. You can literally speak to the masses as a wounded person and create hundreds of years of trauma. What the hell? That's insanity. And she had a lot of political smears under her belt, especially against, Catholic independent women. It was really frowned upon, especially if you're religious. And that's where I think witchcraft wasn't just feared, but it was like literally weaponized. And it was under the case of women, under the title of women. So King James grew up in a climate of paranoia, betrayal, religious tension, religious trauma, and deep fear that dark forces could literally dethrone your ass like it did his mother. So he had to create an obsession with controlling witches and ending witches' lives. And I think that it was maybe even a fear of what happened to his mother, or it could be a hatred. I mean, who knows? Like, the long story short is the dude needed a freaking therapist, okay? Now, another thing that I found really interesting, because, my guides are in here, there's a flash. Maybe they're confirming, yes, he in fact did need a therapist. I was reading that a lot of his, staff workers from King James believed that he was bisexual or gay or closeted. There's actually strong historical evidence that says this, okay? Apparently, he had several intense, emotionally intimate, and likely romantic relationships with men. Most notably, there were some famous ones. George Villiers, who was the Duke of Buckingham at the time, James referred to him as letters as my sweet child and wife, okay? And this is one of his letters. I only desire to live in your heart, die in your arms, and be buried in your eyes. Woo. Okay, King James, that caused fear and paranoia of, isn't it in the Bible that says you shouldn't be gay or something? I don't know. I haven't read it because I think it's just opinionated in my opinion. Shakespearean levels of yearning for their male counterpart that they cannot have due to, he didn't want to lose his throne, period. He didn't want to lose his throne. There was clearly an emotional romantic element involved here, okay? And a lot of his peers knew about it, and they mocked him, made fun of him, whispered about it, but nothing was done because he's the king. Once again, we are following so much religious trauma from this man who wrote this Bible, from this man that wrote a witch hunting book, who was everything he told you not to be. My mind's blown, and I'm tired, okay? So now my Aquarius moon goes again. This is how my thought processes go. Could his queerness have contributed to his hatred towards witches and psychics and women and mystics? That could have been a combined... I just saw someone standing next to me. I don't know who it was. Could it have been a combined... It looked like a little boy. I'm wondering if I'm seeing an image of him as a little boy in what did they call him back then? The little pantaloons thing. Do you know what I'm saying? Pantaloons. I don't know. I'm sorry if you're little King James. So, okay, child wound is what I'm hearing. Child wound. They're pointing child wound. So this was maybe he was gay in the closet, and also his mom had witchcraft trauma. Maybe he had trauma from his mom. Who knows? Maybe he had to be... This sounds like it was a lot to unpack. Was it internalized shame, power? It's a dangerous combo, right? King James was raised in a deeply patriarchal, religious, rigid society, right? Queerness was considered a sin. Femininity was considered a weakness. Women with power, like witches, healers, mystics, that was a threat, okay? He likely had some sort of a repressed desire for men, could not act on that publicly. Religious guilt, feeling like he was going to go to hell for having this queerness of wanting to be with a man. And maybe even a fragile sense of power and masculinity. Maybe deep down, he created this fear in society to make it appear like a masculine armor as ego. Could be. But that's also when you add things like fear of betrayal. He probably watched his mother go through all of this. And then it was almost guilt over his own identity. So he had to come off as like, what are the terms? Righteous and authoritative. So what does that all equal? What is this trauma bucket equal? You get someone who tries to purge the sin from the earth, the kingdom, especially the parts that mirror the power that he wished he possessed and the freedom that he wished that he could express. That's really sad, but also, dude, it's been hundreds of years, bro. Your trauma has like screwed this earth up, bro, and I'm tired, honestly. If you could come down and talk to me, I'd like to give you the middle finger. The witch as a mirror, witches especially, like, were considered psychics, oracles, feminine spiritual leaders. They often use their intuition. They're connected to the divine feminine, inner knowing, sexual, spiritual freedom, power without permission. I mean, isn't there parts in the Bible too, and I'm not quoting this because I have not read it, this is just from what friends have said, that like the woman has to sort of stay pure and you have to marry a virgin and you can't divorce, you know, and then the man can basically do whatever he wants. Like it's just so patriarchal, isn't it? I mean, but this is about a repressed, insecure king. And so the idea of having to live a life of queerness openly with a mother wound, that's terrifying, right? So yeah, he probably internalized his queer shame and then projected it outwards into this anger, aggression towards, like, yes, society, because it wasn't like society was almost against him as well. But anything that was mystical, feminine, or emotionally intuitive, it was almost like he was denying his own divine feminine within, which may have been the queerness part. But it was like he was too scared to connect to the divine feminine within him in a fear the patriarchy would shame him. Because the witch had everything that he couldn't be. Did King James' mother hate witches? No, I think she was pretty much entangled being one herself. Was he queer? Highly likely. He had intense romantic relationships with men and expressed deep affection, and this was in writings that were left over. Did that influence his hatred towards witches? I mean, I think that we could say almost certainly it did, because witches symbolize free will, feminine power, spiritual knowing, all-knowing, connecting to source, and that was all things that he feared not only in himself, but in others. So now we're going to fast forward. Was that, taking all of that into consideration, was the Salem witch trial era an attack on women? 1,000% yes. You have to agree with me on that. The witch trials, especially in Salem itself, 1692, it wasn't just about like religious or like superstition. These were socio-political weapons that were used against women, right? Suppress, punish, erase women. If you step outside these tightly lines that we drew for you, you're in trouble and you're going to get, killed. There were horrible land ownership laws at that time, and like women couldn't own land unless they were widowed or if their relationship was contested by a male, right? So if women obtained these lots of land, the government didn't like it. How do we take it from them? They're a witch. You've been hung. Now we can take your land from you because we don't want women to have any sort of power and control. Many accused witches, look this up yourself, were widows or unmarried women that lived alone, which made them dangerous because they had autonomy over themselves and their body. They had no male protector, no oversight. Accusing them of witchcraft was a legal way to go in and seize their land and take it from them. This isn't like spiritual persecution. This is straight up capitalist misogyny cloaked in piety. Because remember, female knowledge is a threat. A lot of people that were witches, right? Do you even know what the term witch is? Okay, like in our society in this day and age, witch is a bad thing, right? It's scary. It's provoking, right? You don't want to call yourself a witch. Do you know pre all of this religious crap that went on, that witch was a good name? It meant that you were connected to source. It was a beautiful term. It was really, I think, more Nordic or even in certain parts of Europe where they were connected to source. And it meant that they were herbalists, they were midwives, they were healers, they were women that had visions and that were outspoken. It wasn't just women. It was also men that went by this name as well. Men were far less persecuted, though. It was mainly women. It was patriarchy erasing what women were created for. If you were a woman with too much knowledge, if you lived alone, if you were not married, especially by a certain age, if you didn't attend church every Sunday, if you dared exist without male validation from the patriarchy, you were a threat to the frail, fragile male ego. That was a power structure that had now been created by the patriarchy. God's will is shut up and serve. And if you don't, well, we'll eliminate you. Puritan law mixed with the colonies It wasn't separate from religion, but it was sort of intertwined like snakes on a staff. One couldn't really exist without the other. It was just worded in a way it was hidden. Like what King James wrote, demonology, and then his Bible. It informed the Puritan worldview, right? Puritans believed women were more susceptible to the devil. Did you hear what I said? Puritans believed that women were more susceptible to the devil. So that was when the witch hunts started. Women equals weak. You are easily deceived. And since you are weak and easily deceived, and if you're not married and controlled by a man or protected by a man, you should probably be eliminated. You're a threat to society. Let's not forget the Salem witch trials were not about evidence of finding witchcraft. It was about obedience in the patriarchy. And then the witch wound was created. And we still see that to this day, where women call each other fat, call each other ugly. You see floods of comments, jealousy. That's the witch wound. That's deep witch wound in all of women in society after what has happened. How do we heal that? I don't know. Understand that was created. That was a wound created by the patriarchy to call each other out during witchcraft, witch trial times. We need to stop doing that shit. If you were not submissive to the patriarchy, you're a suspect. So the question is, was this patriarchy or patriarchal weaponry? Yeah. And it never really stopped, did it? I mean, look at what I've gone through with paranormal production. The trials were a warning to all women watching. Step out of line and we'll burn your name to the ground. If not, your body. In 1962, women couldn't own land. And today, women still fight for equal pay, autonomy, bodily rights. In 1692, herbal knowledge was demonized. Vitamins, herbology was demonized. Today, it still leaks over. Women's healthcare and reproductive knowledge is still politicized by the patriarchy. There's like facts behind OBGYNs that was all created by the patriarchy. There are countries that find the way OBGYNs do things in this country barbaric. I'm just saying, do your own research on it. Because OBGYNs, I think it was actually created at a time of slavery where doctors were torturing women slaves to figure out how to like birth babies in like the most sort of demonic, dark ways. And that kind of cast it over into what OBGYN is today. And I am not telling you to be fearful of the doctor. Do not do that, because I live in America, and I don't have the money to go to an OBGYN in Europe. I'm not saying that. Don't take my words and twist them. I'm just saying it's time for some changes, is what I'm saying. Back in 1692, widows were accused for having their independence. This day and age, women are still shamed for being too much alone or being cat moms, right? Back then, female intuition was witchcraft. This day and age, intuition, mediumship, spirituality is still mocked and erased unless it's what? Let me hear you say it with me. Male dominated, just like the paranormal that we're in. Did you hear what I just said? Let me read this again. Intuition, mediumship, paranormal investigators, spirituality is still mocked and erased unless it's male dominated. What the hellio? Honestly, is America's policy still holding the torch? Absolutely it is. Let's call it the Puritan hangover. America may be called the land of the free, but what is it actually? Rigid gender roles, deep fear of feminine power, a constant need to control body, soul, and the womb. And much of our political debates, they're just witch trials and drag. Am I wrong? Tell me I'm wrong. Abortion laws, that's about control and ownership over the female body. Attacks on witches, spiritualism, women, queer people online, that's a digital witch hunt, isn't it? Spiritual women being called unhinged or crazy, that's emotional execution. Same spell, new robes. So now here's my big question, my grand finale. Was this all about fear of the divine feminine? You bet your Persephone-crowned ass it is. The witch isn't just a trope, she's an architectural figure. Go back into Nordic times, Greek mythology, way back. The divine feminine doesn't ask for permission, she commands. The divine feminine understands and knows the cycles of death and rebirth. She works with the earth, not against it. She would never birth a child for 9 months and then hand it over so it can be destroyed in war. If our world was ran by divine feminine, it would look quite different. The divine feminine owns herself, and that's the greatest threat of all. The patriarchy did not burn witches out of fear of devil worship. Let's get that straight. They burned them because they feared the women who could not be owned, purchased, and controlled. How many versions of the Bible are there? Short answer, hundreds, okay? Maybe even over 1,000 if you count translations, editions, versions, rewrites. And I just want to break some of this Tower of Babel down, okay? In slow motion. So Catholic Bible, there's 73 books. Protestant Bible, there's 66. Eastern Orthodox, 79 plus. Ethiopian Orthodox, 81. It's the largest, okay, and oldest known biblical canon. So if God's word is unchanging, why does everyone have a different version? The T, politics, that's why. And don't even get me started on translation. Don't even get me started on translation. Like, we're talking Hebrew, the Old Testament, Arabic is Jesus' spoken language, Greek is the New Testament. But then it's translated to Latin, then it's translated English, over 3,500 languages to this day. Every translation is its own interpretation, which means edits, omissions, and deliberate manipulation, okay? I'm going to give you some spicy examples because I need some spicy examples. The word virgin in Isaiah, in Hebrew, it actually means young woman. But it got translated in English Greek to virgin, like don't sleep with anyone. And then boom, you have entire doctrines about Mary that were basically built off a mistranslation. Why do people follow it? Because of fear, authority, control from early on. It was like church and state were fused together. The Bible is not only spiritual code, but it's now legal code literally everywhere in the United States. And if you questioned it at all back in the day, you would be excommunicated, imprisoned, or even death because you may have been considered demonically possessed. So it wasn't just a belief, it was indoctrination by fear. You were forced to believe it, which is a bunch of bull. It's weaponized religion for centuries, colonialism, slavery, politics. It's just, you want to subjugate for the people, find a verse. You want to silence women, there's Paul for that, You want to shame queer people? There's another mistranslation. You want to get elected? Quote King James, the Bible didn't rise to power because of some stupid reason. It rose to power because it was considered holy, and it rose to power because it was only useful to those in power. Now, it's crazy because my other obsession is like going back to like Mesopotamia times, because you talk about the original Bible or scripture was Sumerian tablets, or like the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? These tablets were carved out of stone and they've fallen apart. And that's what all of these Bibles have been sort of created by, are these Mesopotamia tablets. And a lot of them are missing. And that's where people think that some of them were manipulated. The Vatican's room to possess those, but they possess other thousands of ancient documents in the tunnels and the artifacts underground that no one can access. And why do they hide them? Because, Catholicism and religion as a whole is the number one business in the world, and it's tax-free. They have to hide them because it undermines the narrative of what could actually be. They reveal maybe the Bible wasn't first. Maybe God wasn't always male. And maybe pagan or even demonic rituals were once sacred. I mean, it's kind of like patriarchal propaganda that's created. It's like men with ego found empowerment. Even if you think about like occultists and herbalists back in the day, these witches, these women witches, they were sort of like the doctors of their time or pharmaceuticals of their time, but the patriarchy figured out that they could make money off of it. So the witches, the occultists, the herbalists had to be eliminated because it was created into what we know now as big pharma. Think about it though, the Bible has always been edited and translated by men in power for political and religious reasons. Women's voices were silenced and some of them were erased completely. Mary Magdalene was a whore, right? That was the divine feminine being stripped out. Mysticism became hearsay and demonic. And anything that was beyond, the male-dominated hierarchy was labeled evil. They didn't just banish witches, they rewrote history to erase the divine feminine entirely. It was an entire spiritual lineage that got eliminated all at once. So the truth is, religion was hijacked by an empire. Spirituality was replaced by dogma. And ancient wisdom, which is like you think of Atlantean times, including origins of like psychic development, divine feminines connecting to source, psychic mediumship abilities, connecting with the other side, cosmic connections, even astrology. It was hidden, burned, and buried. But now we're waking up. So are many others. So let's go into paranormal. Why is the occult labeled demonic? Because mainstream religion, mainly Christianity, Anything mysterious, mystical outside of, the realm of doctrine is considered demons, Satan, hellfire, and your soul is in danger. So we have to exterminate that. Occult literally means hidden, in case you didn't know that, not evil. So calling it spiritual or demonic is a political move. Occult, hidden knowledge, that's it, not demonic. So mistranslations, I wanted to look up some more. In Hebrew, Satan means adversary, not the red devil in horns. Okay. Early Christian texts talk about divination, dreams, astrology, and spiritual contact, which is legitimate ways to contact the divine. But the Bible was edited to demonize that, right? So the Oracle of Delphi was possessed, right? The Magi, who are the astrologers, they're actually astrologers. They visited Jesus. They were whitewashed as kings. Mary Magdalene, from the priestess to prostitute, thanks to Pope Gregory. And result as this, it's bypassed women's power entirely. So all of this is why I can't get my damn show signed. When you combine church and the state, it's a power couple from hell. Here's what the system doesn't want you to know. Astrology, astral travel, paranormal, speaking with your guides, speaking with loved ones on the other side, understanding that you're a multi-dimensional soul and you are multiple places at once right now, even though it seems like you're only on Earth. It doesn't want you to question authority. The system doesn't want you to remember your past lives. And they definitely don't want you to heal your trauma, because healed trauma is empowered people, which can beat the system. And that's especially dangerous. So they have to keep you in that 9 to 5 cycle loop so that you stay depressed, unfed, and hungry and poor. Because if you become empowered, you get out of that cycle and the masses are no longer controllable. That makes you sovereign. It makes sovereign people don't need a priest. Sovereign people don't need a church. They don't need a savior. They don't even need a king. They don't need a master, because they don't obey, because they've already connected to source themselves. They've bypassed what the system has forcefully created. That's what makes you dangerous. It's spiritual capitalism, right? Let's call it what it is. Let's just call it what it is. You can't realize the divine is inside of you, because that takes away their empire, their money. The whole system would collapse if every person woke up in this way. So what is a cult if it's not bad? It's alchemy of the soul, dark night of the soul, rebirths, right? It's normal. It's direct communication with source, your guides with spirit, communicating with the dead on the other side, unfiltered knowledge of the universe, cycles of death and rebirth, symbolic literacy, understanding language that they don't teach, like tarot and runes, dream interpretation, numerology, and astrology. But guess who did practice? It wasn't just witches. You know who the original occultists were? The ancient Egyptians, the druids, the oracles, the shamans, the priestesses of Avalon, mystics that were across Asia and Africa and even the Americas within the indigenous tribes, Nordic, Celtic. But once Rome and the church consolidated power, the traditions were slaughtered, they were demonized, they were stolen, rebranded from witchcraft and devil worship into be godly. So now you know that the Bible wasn't the first word, it's just the most printed. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this. The occult wasn't the enemy, it was the most feared, because it connects you the fastest to source directly. And the intuition you get, that's your divine soul speaking to your higher self. That is Christ consciousness. I really think that when they say when Christ rises, he rises within you. When you choose death and rebirth, when you choose to heal from the trauma of this world, when you choose to exit the matrix. The system was unfortunately designed to make you feel small and call your own power dangerous. Your wisdom is blasphemous. Your beauty is a distraction, Crystal. The only thing you're good for is sleeping with us as producers, and maybe, just maybe, after you open your legs, we'll give you a series. But remember, you're the spell. You're the scripture. You're the captain of your own ship. You get to create your life now. You're sitting here looking at me, watching this, and you're living proof that God never needed a middleman. You just needed to remember your own power. Okay, I'm getting off my soapbox, kids. I hope you had a great night with me. That was some really good tea. If you love this episode, make sure you leave me some love. Remember, we're on Spotify. I'm on Apple Podcasts, all major streaming services, wherever you listen. I think we're even on iHeartRadio. We're definitely on YouTube. I'd love for you to share your thoughts. Does anyone else have a witch wound? Did anyone else burn at the stake with me? I assume if you're into paranormal and you're watching this, we've all burned together. So hey fam, holler, high five. Good to be back. Let's not burn this time. And remember, the next podcast is going to piggyback off of this. The next podcast, we're going to talk about remembering your power. This is men and women alike, because I think the patriarchy's done an awful good job at also making men forget their power, and we're going to need them to rise. Until next time, stay haunted, stay holy, and never forget the most sacred things are the ones they tried to burn. I love you, fam. Catch you next time. And that's a wrap on today's episode of Ghost Girl Diaries. Thank you so much for joining me in my crypt. If you loved what you heard, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment. It helps the ghostly adventures continue. And also don't forget to follow me on all social media platforms. You can search for Crystal Leandra or Ghost Girl Diaries. Please support me on both. This is where you can catch exclusive content, behind the scenes footage, and stay up to date on all things paranormal and glam. And as always, stay curious, stay fearless, and stay spooky. And I'll catch you next time on Ghost Girl Diaries, where the dead never rest, and neither do we. Until then, my ghoulish friends, sweet screams.